Hi, I'm John Campbell, and here in the Hambletonian offices, and I'm going to take on an entirely new role for me. Instead of being the interviewee, I'm going to be the interviewer. This year's Hambletonian Man of the Day, my brother, Jim Campbell. I guess first question, how'd Hambletonian Day work out for you?
Well, obviously it worked out very well. It was something that I never imagined could happen, and it was one of those days at the races where everything just fell into place. There was a lot of luck involved. There was a lot of hard work on my crew. Everything just fell right into place for us.
Well, you and I talk all the time about your horses, and I knew, going into the year, what you had for 3-year-olds. And once Fashion Schooner showed that she could go with the top ones, or you felt that she could, you had a very firm schedule mapped out for her. And with Cool Papa Bell, you weren't sure he was a Hambletonian horse, and you had kind of a plan A, B, and C for him. Tell us a little bit about your thinking going into the planning for Fashion Schooner versus how it came with Cool Papa Bell, because they were two different routes you took.
Well, that's a good point you brought up because actually I called you one day because I did something that was probably uncharacteristic. Once we realized Fashion Schooner, she had a be a contender for the Oaks. And when she got through the New Jersey Sire Stake final and won that, I remember I called you and just got your opinion. And we went 5 weeks in between races with her, which was totally by design. The reason for it was because I didn't want to take her up for a qualifier because there was some days trotters were qualifying in 51 and 52, and I just thought that's just taking a race out of her. And she's such a athletic filly, and you can train her wherever you want to train her. I just thought that she could be fit enough, ready for the Reynolds, and then she skips a week and went into the Del Miller, and then she skipped another week and went into the Hambletonian Oaks eliminations. And so the only time she was really coming back in 7 days was if she raced the elimination and got into the final, and that was the only time she really had to come back in 7 days for almost 2 months.
Uh, with Cool Papa Bell, totally different approach.
With him being New York Sires, and his races both started off at Tioga and Vernon, which were very good tracks to race at. The glitch that we had was for the Zweig $300,000 race. He made a break in behind the gate, which was uncharacteristic of him. It was just one of those days. It just wasn't his day, and it wasn't like he did something wrong. He just went in behind the gate, got himself a little crooked, and he made a break. So that kind of threw a little damper on us. And then his next race for New York was at Yonkers, which we couldn't really pass it up because it usually goes for good money there. And Scott Farber, the owner, said that if he wins that race, then there's our money for the starting fee for the Hambletonian. And so he went out at Yonkers. He was very impressive, won easy, and Scott said, we're definitely going now.
Yeah, it's just a different approach, and I'm sure you were thinking about protecting your points for that final of the New York Sire Stakes with him as well. So you really couldn't keep him on the big track, even if you thought he was a Hambletonian contender at that time.
Well, I had told Scott when we were racing at Vernon, and that was the reason I wanted to race in the Zweig, because I figured he could get stretched out a couple of races up at Vernon, being a 7/8 mile track, as opposed to, I wouldn't want to race just on half-mile track races the whole time going into a race like the Hambletonian, because they do have to get stretched out, in my opinion, on a bigger track at some point.
Now look at the aspect of drivers. You're fortunate with Fashion Schooner. She was a top filly, and Timmy was pretty well committed to her right through the Oaks, I'm sure, which from your standpoint you're actually pretty happy about, because as I tell people, anything with the name Schooner in their name, they come with a temper. And you've had remarkable luck training these Schooner horses, but they can be a challenge. And I think the fact that Timmy could stay with her was somewhat of a relief to you.
It was. I was a little worried in the Del Miller when she drew in with Mannon, who was undefeated at that point, and so I texted Timmy to see what he was doing, and he texted me back, "You're good," and you're right, it was a relief, but you know that family better than anybody, and I'm just going to share a real quick story of where you didn't get any credit where credit should have been deserved. Um, it was back in March, and it would be the Pine Schooner, who was the mother of Broadway Schooner and the grand dam of Fashion Schooner. She was a pine chip filly, which Jules had bought. We'd bought her in Lexington. And I was just getting over pneumonia at the time, and March staking was due. So Jules wanted you to come down to sit behind the horses to make sure that we were staking them the way they should be staked. And so I'm sitting there with Jules watching you and a couple of my assistants train, and you go out with Pine Schooner, and she run every step of the mile, never hit the trot. And Jules is sitting there, well, I guess we'll be getting rid of that one. And when you came off, you told Jules, don't sell this one. If she gets it, she'll be good, but you don't want to sell her. So that whole family line got started with that, and it hadn't been for you seeing something in her, because she came back. She wasn't a top filly at 3, but she was a good secondary filly, and took a nice record, and then went on to throw Broadway Schooner, and then Broadway Schooner through Broadway Donna, Fashion Schooner. So you deserve a little credit there, John.
How about that? I wasn't even aware of that, Jim. That's pretty interesting. Now, from a driver situation with Cool Papa Bell, I know Brian Sears had raced him most of the year, and then he couldn't go with him up in Vernon. You went back to Brian for Yonkers and the elimination. What was yours and Scott's thinking on the probability that if Joviality get in, that you wouldn't have Brian? Was your thought process, we're hoping we get him for both, or you just want to get him in the final, we'll worry about a driver later?
We didn't have a clear-cut like for the eliminations of the Hambletonian. We didn't have like a clear cut of the one of the top 7 drivers that could commit, because pretty much every one of them had some horses that they had been driving, or for big stables that they had been driving for. And so Scott and I talked about it, and we said, you know what, let's just take a shot, put Brian down, and hope that maybe he doesn't get in with Joviality. And as it turned out, Brian's 2 mounts, Temporal Hanover and Joviality, both got in together, and he had nothing in the other division. And at that point we were happy to have Brian, but knew that probably it was going to be the last race that we were going to have him, as long as he got qualified.
I talked to you after his elimination race, and well, you and I both thought he was done in the middle of the last turn, and then got squared up in the stretch, and kept chugging right to the wire. Was actually doing his best, trotting right at the wire. Tell us about the challenge of a horse that's gone around a half-mile track his whole life and been very good on the turns, and that particular night in the elimination, Brian had to wait on him and actually be very patient with him just to get him around the last turn.
Well, that's what drives you crazy sometimes. Brian had driven the horse in an overnight at Chester, which isn't always the easiest track, but Brian got off him that day and said he trots the turns better than anywhere else on the track, and then said the same thing in Tioga. And then when he raced him in Yonkers, and the first thing out of his mouth was, he said, he trots these turns better than any horse I've ever seen. He said he just goes right around them. And then come to the Meadowlands, you'd think that would be the least of your problems, and he's running in around the last turn at the Meadowlands. But luckily, a guy like Brian, he knew to wait on him, didn't try to drive him through it. I thought the horse was all done. I had to warm a horse up after that race. I almost walked away from the TV because I thought he was just going to back through the field. But then, like you said, I watched the replay several times, and down by the wire, he had a lot of late trot right down by the wire. He trotted right through the wire.
So what adjustments or changes did you make to try and get him through the last turn better? Now, Todd was fortunate enough to be at the rail around the last turn, which would help him. What was there anything you did different to try and get him around that last turn better?
Well, he's been a little tricky. He wears a Murphy blind on the outside, and that's, for a horse that wants to run out a little bit. And I took it off him one time, and because he acted like he was going to run in, but he run out. And we kind of went through this training him down. He would, if he run in one training and we rigged him for running in, then he'd run out the next training. So he was wearing a Murphy blind on the outside and a burr head pull on the inside. And I was a little scared of making anything drastic. I just put a little, just a touch sharper head pull on the inside of him and was hoping for the best.
That worked out. Good plan. Now, Fashion Schooner, she's had the 10 hole, and people kind of just lost a little track of her. I think if she had drawn, inside 1 through 6, she would have attracted more attention. But the way the race turned out, she's almost what the modern horse is. She's parked to the quarter 26-1, which is extremely fast. Second quarter in 29 seconds, and that's really a lot of or all the break that these top horses need is that 1 quarter, or even sometimes less than a quarter. And watching the race, I thought she was more relaxed going to the half than she was in her elimination. And I knew Venerable was getting away at the back where Wizzini had made a break, and I thought to myself, I don't think they'll ever catch her. When you saw 26-1, what were your thoughts?
I was actually I was happy that she got to the front. I know it was a tough first quarter, but I also had visions of her maybe not getting to the front till after the quarter and getting strung out more, or I didn't know how many hard they would be leaving on the inside of her, and if she got stuck out 3-4 wide in the first turn. I thought watching it live, she got to the front relatively in pretty good shape considering the different possibilities. And then when I saw when Timmy was, he was able to back her down really good the second quarter. And I thought that, if she just goes out and races like she can race, then they'd have to come hard to beat her.
Yeah, it's the modern horse. They've changed so much. It used to be 26-1. You'd be looking them, but they'd be beat 10 lengths, and it's just not the case anymore.
No, you and I have talked about it all the time that the front end speed on good horses, if they don't get roughed up the first, if they get a breather somewhere in there, they're hard to catch.
Yeah. Now, Miss Wallner Fashion won Saturday, but she kind of got lost in the shuffle, and she had come off 2 races where she'd made breaks, and she was actually certainly won more money than Fashion Schooner did last year, and showed that she could go with the top ones. I said something to the effect, did you bet on her when I saw you briefly after her race? He said, no, but I should have. I changed her all around. What sort of changes and what did you do different? Because there's a filly that you've had for a year and a half racing, and it's a constant battle to change these things, isn't it?
Well, if you remember right, when I told you after the race that I made a change that you really would like, you laughed and said you must have lightened her up in front. And I said, yeah, we just basically we had to weight her down pretty good towards the end of her 2-year-old year. She had steel shoes on and bell boots. We had to add the bell boots towards the end because she's not the easiest. Even when you watch her, she just doesn't always look comfortable. And so after making 2 breaks in a row, I just figured I got nothing to lose by lighting her up. So it was just steel shoes, but we pulled the bell boots off. So she probably had about 6 to 8 ounces less on each front foot, and she trained good that way. And you're always nervous. That they don't always transition from a good training to a good race. And the way that she did it, she was all over the racetrack, and Timmy said she was as solid as he's ever seen her.
Well, now you're making these changes on these horses and coming across as a fairly sharp trainer. How about the betting department? Were you sharp enough to bet on any of your horses on Saturday?
No, I don't bet on any of my horses, especially on a big day like that, because I always figure I'll jinx them.
Well, I think your son James was smart enough to bet $20 on Cool Papa Bell, so he was ahead of the curve there.
He's a lot smarter than I was. He bet Fashion Schooner too. He didn't get there in time for Miss Wallner, but he bet Fashion Schooner. But he bet $2 to win on her, and he wasn't too happy with getting $15 back. So he he upped it to 20 to win on Cool Papa Bell.
Uh-huh.